Uh, we are live streaming on YouTube as another option for seeing this. And this is, oh, here's Frank. This is the quarterly presentation of Pat Stats, which we do once again in conjunction with Minneapolis Area Realtors. I'm pretty excited to also have Jackson Pino with us, our policy and research manager, because once again, it gives us the balance of a practitioner in the field like Pat and somebody who's spends their life being more of a policy wonk, looking at things from a different perspective. And so that gives us a great opportunity to look at the full spectrum. I know I always have lots of questions, such as when is the inventory going to loosen up, which is maybe one of those unanswerable questions. Are baby boomers ever going to stop staying in their houses forever or start selling? But things that we get to explore. It's always interesting what's going on in the market. Every quarter, it seems like there's big, interesting questions. And so as most of you know, the Zoom protocols, we'll put the questions and answers in the chat. And oh, great, here's Jonathan, Pat.
I see.
Yep. And I'll be hosting for most of the time frame. We do our best to close out entirely at 11:15. And we will get ready to start. So we appreciate everyone who is here to check this out, and your questions and conversation at the end are always fascinating. And again, part of that fun part of the end is the dialogue between Pat and Jackson about what they have each presented, because they each take a segment of this on this market update. And interesting out of the bat, because this is typically the strongest time of year for activity in real estate and closings, and I'm not sure that's the case this year, but we'll dig into that quickly. So once again, I'm Carson Brooks. I am the broker for Exit Realty Metro, with offices in Minneapolis locations and the great Red River Valley, and a lot of very interesting, capable realtors and practitioners are here, so it'll be interesting to hear some feedback at the end. With that, everyone knows Pat Paulson, once upon a time an accountant and a guy who geeks out on the market in his sleep, and our policy and research manager, Jackson Pino from Minneapolis Area Realtors. So we will ask, and I will assist for you to mute during the conversation, and Pat's going to jump in right now.
Thank you, Carson, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Jackson, for joining us as well. I will get right into things. The big news that's been impacting our real estate market for the last year or so has been inflation, and the response to inflation by the Federal Reserve and the bond markets has been interest rates increasing. So that obviously has increased the cost of home ownership dramatically. The monthly payments that buyers have to pay at 6 or 7% are, literally $800 a month more than 3% for a median priced home. So it's just a huge impact. This, though, has hit our market on top of some very long-term entrenched demographic trends that don't go away despite the large impact of the higher interest rates. So those demographic trends are very large millennial generation that is substantially into or entering their 30s, which is kind of prime home buying age. In addition to that, we've got boomers like myself. I'm in the younger half of the baby boomers, and many of us were expected to be selling our houses now, but many of us are not. We're actually aging in place, and now it looks like many of the boomers are going to wait until they're in their 80s to sell. Add these generational trends to the fact that we just haven't built enough homes since the market crash of 2007. So we've gone, 15 years without building enough homes. So we're in kind of a crunch with a low inventory of homes available, particularly affordable opportunities. So these forces, these countering forces of low affordability, that kind of puts a price ceiling. It makes it hard for prices to go up much. At the same time, low inventory relative to, still some demand out there, kind of puts a floor underneath the prices. That's a pretty hard floor. And consequently, home prices have just kind of gone sideways now. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So here is inflation over the years. And yes, being a boomer, I'm old enough to remember the 1970s when inflation was extremely high and the challenges there and how they ended inflation with high interest rates. And I did, yes, one time buy a house when interest rates were 16, 17%. And I got a special subsidized rate of 11 7/8 that I paid for the next 18 years. Inflation was dramatically under control by around the turn of the century. The Fed likes to keep it at about 2%. This chart shows the CPI in blue, and then the core, which is the CPI minus the very volatile energy and food costs in the red. And then you can see way over on the right how inflation has jumped up dramatically during the COVID time period. And now how it's coming down. The latest number for the CPI was 3%. So it's approaching closer to the target range that the Fed has. Okay, this next chart shows interest rates over time, over 50 years or so. And this shows how they spiked up dramatically, the mortgage rates in response to inflation in the early 80s, and how they gradually worked their way down. And then in the last 10 years or so, how they've been under 5%. And then during COVID, substantially lower to the point where they were even under the 3% before jumping up in recent months in the last year. This chart shows the more recent time period. It's basically the same as the last chart. And it shows the dramatic increase in interest rates, in 2022 and into this year, and how it has kind of stabilized a little bit. And this is like a week old, this chart. So they've come down a little bit since then with the latest inflation report, but they've kind of stabilized in this range for the time being. I do want to point out that when rates were as low as they were prior to this increase during the COVID time period, and I'm pointing this out because a lot of people may be longing for return to 3% mortgage rates or the opportunity to get things in the high twos or whatever. And I want to point out that the Federal Reserve is the entity that controls the money, the banking system, and they influence interest rates by actually setting the rates that banks charge each other, so those really short-term rates. And they don't set the long-term rates that we're looking at here. The market sets this. However, the Fed has huge influence in that, this market is part of many markets that investors could invest in. And when the Fed sets rates on the short term, other rates do have to respond to that to make their bonds appealing to investors out there. So other rates do go up. And then the Fed has significant additional impact on mortgage rates or long-term treasuries by actually participating in those markets, by purchasing or selling those bonds. And in large part, when rates got down as low as they did during the COVID time period, that had a lot to do with the Fed actually buying mortgage bonds and buying, longer-term treasuries, which push those rates down. So those rates that some people might be longing to get back to were not really true market rates. I mean, there were market rates, but because the Fed is a player in the market, but they were intentionally pushed down by the Fed with a lot of buying. I think, the Fed really has a mission to fight inflation and to prevent it from coming back. And the last inflationary time period in the 70s and 80s, it literally took a couple decades for the fear of that, to go away or to get long enough in the past where the Fed was really willing to push rates down substantially. The fear of this inflationary period, or the impact of this inflationary period, is likely to last some time. So unless we enter into some sort of a crisis, I don't see the Fed making extra efforts to push rates down. Now, I think they're going to come down naturally with the market and start to gradually come down soon, but I don't see 3% in our future. Okay, now demographic factors are huge. This chart shows the age group 20 to 29 in red and 30 to 39 in blue. So these are largely millennials right now. This is a couple years old, showing projections into the future. Where we sit right now would be a little bit to the right of where those lines crossed. Okay, and so think of the blue, the 30 to 39 age group as being the prime home buyers. And those numbers are on the rise, and they will be on the rise for the rest of this decade. And they're going to peak then at about the end of this decade, and then they're going to stay high. So this is your demand. And many of these millennials just have not been able to buy a home. Maybe they've tried in the past few years, but with the limited supply, it's been tough. But they're there, and they still want to buy, and they're going to continue to want to buy. This chart shows the older age groups. In blue is the basically the boomer generation from about 60 up to 79. Actually, people in the 50s are boomers in the late 50s. In red is the 80 plus age group. It was believed probably 10 years ago that most of us boomers would be selling now in our 60s and in our 70s. That's not turned out to be the case. And now it looks like many of us are wanting to age in place, and we're looking at probably not moving until we're 80 plus. So that line in red is going to start increasing in a few years. But this big wave of boomers selling off their homes is really going to be more of a story of the 2030s as opposed to the 2020s. Okay, let's focus on what's happening now and what's happening in our community. So supply and demand. Demand is measured by sales. This particular chart of closed sales over the past 5 years is a 12-month rolling average. So this intends to show us, the trends of sales without the seasonal ups and downs. So on the left side of the chart, we did have a record of about 61,000 sales per year. And we were kind of at that point or close to that point, 60 to 61,000 for a few years pre-COVID. And then during COVID, with the lower interest rates, we dramatically increased sales, kind of busted through that old record in 2020 and then again in 2021. And then with the rising interest rates, sales have really dropped off the table. So this chart, being a 12-month rolling average, is lagging. So if you look at any point in this line as an average of the prior 12 months, so the end at the right, which is still pointing downwards, is really over the last 12 months. What I wanted to know is really what's happening now. Have we hit bottom? Because this doesn't look like we've hit bottom. And so I did some extra checking that, we don't have simple charts to access it. I did some manual stuff, and we've pretty much, unless interest rates jump up above 7, we're pretty much at the bottom. So the last few months have kind of trended like we're that we've bottomed out, and we're kind of at this pace, which is likely going to be about 43 to 45,000 per year, that kind of a pace. But we've pretty much bottomed out here. And this, if and when rates start to come down, like they ease down into the 5s and so forth, these numbers are likely to go up. Okay, sales is showing a very similar response. or new listings. So why are new listings dropping off dramatically? Many of the potential sellers are also buyers, and many homeowners bought in the last few years, or they refinanced in the last few years. And so if they're going to sell and move, which many of them may want to do, they're going to be trading a 3% mortgage for a 6.5% mortgage, and that's not so appealing. So these numbers have dropped off dramatically too. And I'm going to show you a longer picture of this, because even with this huge drop off, where we were before pre-COVID was actually pretty low numbers as it stands. So this is a 15-year look at this chart. So we dropped off, we were in the 75 to 79,000 range, and now dropping off down to about 60, but we were up at 110,000 back 15 years ago or so. So we've had, this is in part showing us why our inventory is so low. And speaking of which, this is our inventory, the number of homes for sale over time over the last 15 years. And it's just quite simply, it's been low. It did bottom out in around the beginning of 2022, or a little bit earlier. This again is a 12-month rolling average. And it did start to go up, but then with the sharp drop off of seller activity, it is now trending downwards again. And this this essentially is probably the most telling chart in terms of why prices are not falling despite the affordability challenge, because there really is a low inventory out there and a low supply demand ratio. Here's prices in the Twin Cities, and this chart I've moved to monthly so you can see the seasonal ups and downs. You can see how prices go up in the spring and summer every year, and then they drop off in the fall and winter. This is largely because many sellers put their homes on the market in the spring and summer. And what sells first? Well, the best ones sell first. Buyers always like the good stuff. And so the higher priced houses sell first, and then we get later in the year, there's not much else for sale, and the leftovers are selling at lower prices. So we just, for the month of June, which is frequently the high point, high price point each year, is frequently June, not always, but frequently. And we just set a new all-time record at 382,000 for June of this year, just about 0.5% above the 380 from last year. If you look at the rolling average that takes the seasonal ups and downs out, you can see how the prices have actually kind of flatlined, essentially. So this is where we are. As I said in the beginning, we've got kind of a hard ceiling above prices with the low affordability, and then we have a hard floor below prices with the low inventory, and so prices are just kind of going sideways. This chart's interesting to me. So this is the sales over the last year, and it's broken down by price range. And the lowest price range under 209,000 is down on the bottom in the blue, and there's very few sales because there's very few listings in that price range, unfortunately. The other three price ranges.
Are there any in that price range? I mean, it's almost like hard to collect the data.
It's very hard, and I've got another chart that I'm going to show a little bit more on that. This is interesting to me as I think of the prices that we report on a regular basis. The median price is it's just the median price of those homes that sold during this time period. And then we try to report price trends. Prices have gone up or down by comparing these sales, the median price of these sales, to the median price of other sales during another time period of completely different houses. Okay, so what this is showing me is that at the peak of this chart, where all of these price ranges kind of peak in sales at about 2,000 in about May of 2022, these upper three price ranges were pretty close in number. But then as interest rates went up and the cost of the monthly housing mortgage payments went up, a lot of the buyers reverted to buying in that red group, which was the lower of the top three price ranges. And you can see how the red kind of went up higher than the blue, the green and purple. I'm kind of colorblind, you guys. So And now you see they're kind of coming together again. So as we saw in late 2022 and early 2023, as we were starting to see prices, really flatten out and even decline for a month or two, part of that is a reflection of the actual houses that were selling. And so many of the buyers were turning to houses that just weren't as good because that's all that they could afford. So we may have had a situation where values might have still actually been going up, but the prices that we were reporting were flattening out or maybe going down a little bit. Here's quotes. There's a number of organizations that put out and track pricing. Here's some quotes from Black Knight. Firming prices have now fully erased the pullback that we tracked through the last half of 2022. And our index, home price index, has reached a new record high in May. The reheating is widespread, with more than half of the 50 largest US markets seeing prices at or above 2022 peaks. And this all has to do with not just here in the Twin Cities, but across the country, inventories are low. Okay, let's look at some secondary statistics that help tell a story about the heat of the market. Okay, so days on market over the last 5 years. And this is a very seasonal statistic. It really goes up in the winter and it really comes down in the spring and summer. And the entire spread of this 5-year range is in seller market territory. Okay, but you can see during COVID how low it got. We got down to 7 days on the market in the spring markets in 2021 and 2022. And then in the winter time, we didn't even go up that much during the COVID time period. Now this year we've reverted back to less of an extreme seller's market, but we're still in a seller's market. And during the winter, this last winter, we went up actually a little bit higher than we did in days on market than we did the prior years before COVID. But now we're back down to about 11 or 12 days on the market, which is, pretty hot. So we've heated up quite a bit this spring. This one shows the sale price as a ratio to the asking price, to the listing price. And pre-COVID, each year, in the seasonality during the spring and summer, we kind of hit 100%. So the median price was 100% of the median listing price. And we had never broken above that 100% before until the COVID time period where we burst through that, and the median price with all the multiple offer situations and people bidding up prices went up to above 103% for those two COVID years, 2021 and 2022. And then this last year, you can see how we actually dropped down in the winter below the pre-COVID time period. But now we hit the 100% and we've just eased up in June a little bit above the 100%. So again, we're in a hot market, not as hot as 2022 or 2021, but a pretty hot market nonetheless. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up my portion with about 10 or so additional charts that offer a very interesting perspective. And then we're going to let Jackson take on his part. Okay, so this one, Carson, again, focusing on the price ranges. And in blue, the lowest price range, 209,000 or less. These are the number of homes for sale over the last 10 years. And you can see how that low price range has dropped down to about 500. Okay. Now, most of us on this call are realtors. And as realtors, we know that of those 500 some homes for sale, many of them are actually already sold contingent on inspection or with some other kind of contingency. Okay. So there's really less than 500 available. We also know that many of them are condos, and that a lot of people want condos. We need condos and so forth, but there's a lot of people that actually want single family homes. And this kind of shows you in the entire Twin Cities metro area, 16 counties, how few houses there are that are available at 209 or less. Now, the problem is we may in the Twin Cities have a pretty good median income of whatever it is, 90 to 100,000 or so. But the median income is really lifted up by homeowners. If you look at the median income of tenants, in some of our communities, we're looking more like about 48,000 or so. And with today's interest rates, the median income tenant can't even afford 209,000. Okay, so this is our challenge for prospective buyers. Affordability is the biggest challenge that we're looking at.
And think of what they pay in rent. It's a
Exactly.
bad deal.
This chart shows home ownership in the United States. So the home ownership rate. And if we're looking over on the right side of the chart, we can see in the late 90s, home ownership rates started to increase dramatically into the 2000s up until right before the foreclosure crisis. This had a little bit to do with the beginning of the use of first-time homebuyer money. It had a lot to do with the bad predatory lending of subprime financing in the 2000s, where homeownership actually got higher than it should have at the time. And then during the foreclosure crisis, many of the people lost their homes, and a lot of investors bought homes during that time period. Starting a few years back, that trend is reversed, and we are increasing our home ownership, which is great. And we're increasing our home ownership with good quality mortgage financing, not subprime financing. It's good to know that in Minnesota, our home ownership rate has followed a very similar pattern, but it's quite a bit higher than the national average. We are actually the third highest state in the country in home ownership. The Twin Cities, by the way, of the 50 largest cities in the country, we're the fifth lowest in investor ownership of single family homes. Okay. Now, I do want to point out in the middle of this chart where you can see where home ownership went from the 40s up into the 60s, back in starting in the 1940s, in the early 1940s. This had a lot to do with the introduction of 30-year fixed rate mortgages with low down payments. The introduction during the Great Recession or the Great Depression of FHA, VA loans, and then conventional loans backed with mortgage insurance. And that's a big part of what changed us from a nation of renters to a nation of homeowners. Okay, here's a chart that's showing us the affordability challenge. And you can see over on the right in the blue how the payment as a ratio to income has gone up dramatically to 35.7% compared to just a short time ago when it was near 20%. And this is actually even less affordable than 2006, prior to the market crash. The only time that it was actually less affordable than this was back in 1980, 1981, 82, when interest rates were so high. So this is our challenge. This is why so many people are having a difficult time buying. This is part of our challenge as well, and part of the reason why we have such low inventory. This shows new construction, and in red, it's single-family homes. In blue, it's apartment buildings mostly. That construction of apartment buildings has picked up of late, and the single-family home construction was picking up, dropping off a little bit, but you can see the huge drop-off in the 2007 through 2010, 2011. And we went just for a number of years without building enough homes, even though we knew the huge millennial generation was aging into first moving out of parents' homes into apartments and now wanting to buy homes. And we're not prepared, sadly. And this shows the pricing of new construction. And this is another big challenge that we have for a variety of reasons. The cost of materials, the cost of labor. A big part of it is the impact fees that different cities and localities charge for new construction, regulations that require housing to be a certain size or lots to be a certain size, or setbacks, or 3-car garage requirements. Various things and various reasons prevent us from building more affordable housing. And so the cost of new construction is close to 500,000. Now, I will add that generally speaking, most new construction is a good thing. If you have a development where you add, 400 homes that are $500,000 each, they're not going to immediately help the need of these first-time home buyers. However, of those 500 homes that are sold, maybe 3/4 of them, so 370, 375 of those households might be selling, another home, essentially, and or they're moving from someplace, basically. And some of them might even be selling or moving from affordable housing, okay? But wherever they're moving from, there's people that are going to move into those places, and they're leaving other places behind. And some of those might be affordable. So, usually when you develop housing, you're going to free up some affordable housing. Now, that said, we really need more affordable housing. So if we can find a way to actually build housing that's affordable, that's going to be more of a direct impact on what we really need most at this time. Okay, here's a chart that shows rent activity and rent prices. And there's multiple different measures here. So again, I'm a little bit colorblind, but if you look over on the right side, there's two lines there's three lines that are coming down, that are dropping down dramatically. There's two lines that are not. They look like they just kind of peaked. And those two measures are the ones that are used by the department, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics in determining the inflation numbers. And the inflation numbers include a basket of goods, and housing cost is a big part of that. Okay. So those measures are really rather lagging, and they reflect what the reality was maybe more like about a year ago. And so the numbers that the Fed are relying upon as they measure inflation, for a big part of inflation, for the housing cost, really the reality is more like the other three lines that have dropped down dramatically, which are much more current, reflective of the current marketplace. So housing cost has basically gone down to the point where it's not really increasing. Okay, it is not going down, but it's not increasing, yet the measure that the Fed is relying upon is still showing strong increases. So likely in the coming months, those inflation numbers, as they catch up to current reality, are going to come down further, which is good, which is a good sign indicating that mortgage rates will probably come down further. But I do want to forewarn, the good picture, the good news. Let's look at the reality here. Rents for 2 years increased dramatically. Okay. Now it's good that they're not increasing so much anymore, but they're really not coming down. So rents are high. And so this is the other challenge with affordable housing and the lack of affordable housing. Rents are high. It's expensive to buy a house. It's expensive to rent a house. So these are part of the challenges that we have. And this is part of the reason why people still want to buy, is because rents are so high. Okay. This chart shows us last year in 2022, who the home buyers were. And the millennial generation and the boomer generation are the largest two generations, so large that they're broken into two parts. Okay. The chart makes it look like the Gen Xers were the biggest purchasers, but actually it was the boomers. If you put the two boomers, youngers and the older boomers together, that was the largest home buying generation. This is really significant because the prior 8 years or so, from about 2013 or 2014 up to 2021, the largest home buying group were millennials. But with the huge increase in interest rates, what we see is they're really struggling to buy. And that's where the boomers kind of stepped in and bought a larger share of the homes. This chart shows of home buyers, and you can see way over in the left, it divides it into age ranges, but way over in the left is all buyers. And the majority of home buyers are married couples. And a couple of reasons for this. One is people tend to buy homes when their household situation, their family situation, whatever, is kind of in a settled state, when it is where they want it to be for the future. And a lot of times, once people are married, they're kind of they're wanting to lay down the roots because their household makeup is settled somewhat. Okay. And so they're buying homes. The other reason why they're buying homes is because many of them have two incomes and now they can afford it, whereas people that are single do not. The other interesting thing is of the rest of the buyers, single women, single females are about twice as likely as single males to be home buyers. This one's very, very interesting to me. I saw Lawrence Yoon put this up on the screen in a different format, but this again right here is 2022. And this is the distance between the home purchase and the previous residence. And for all buyers, the median distance was 50 miles. Now, what makes this interesting, if you look at past information, past years, like literally the median distance for many, many years before was 15 miles, 15 as in 1-5. All of a sudden, in the course of 1 year, 2022, that median distance has jumped up to 50. Okay. Now, part of it might be that there's more boomers buying last year, and more of the boomers are moving further. You can see the younger boomers, 58 to 67, moving a median distance of 90 miles. So some of us are just getting out of Dodge. We're moving out of state or whatever. But a lot of this is a reflection of the changing times where remote work has really become a reality, which allows people to live wherever they want. And so people are moving further than where they could before. And this, of course, makes for interesting things. We think of real estate as and market data as location, and we're focused on the Twin Cities market here. But more and more, we are becoming more competitive with markets in other states because people could live here or they could live there, right? And so there's more competition there. This chart's very interesting to me. This shows the makeup of current mortgage holders and the interest rate on their loans. And so at the present time, on the right of this chart, in the dark blue and in the light blue, dark blue, we have interest rates less than 3%. Light blue, we've got 3 to 4%. Gray, we've got 4 to 5%. More than half of the people have less than 4% on their mortgages. And these, we've been talking about millennials and boomers. Many of these here are Gen X homeowners that might want to move, but are kind of locked in because they're low rate. They don't want to give up. And this chart shows delinquency rate. And this shows delinquency rate on mortgages as being very low. Keep in mind also that we're close to record levels of equity, meaning the mortgages that people have on their homes are much lower than the actual value of their homes. So there's a really strong health of homeowners and a really low likelihood of a wave of foreclosures coming anytime soon because people are actually making their payments. So just a couple summary points before Jackson takes over. Inflation impact on rates is going to probably last longer than we expect. We've got this kind of battle royale between low affordability and low inventory, which is keeping prices flatlining. We got boomers and millennials, owners and buyers. There's really a huge gap between homeowners that bought their homes at lower prices and have really low interest rates, and people that want to buy where prices are high now and interest rates are high. So there's a huge gap there, which is really a challenge. It's kind of an unfair situation. There's been a new construction shortage, even though construction has picked up. It's going to take a lot of years of excess building to really get to where we need, especially with affordable housing. And then there's the lock-in effect of rapidly rising interest rates. As I've mentioned, people are kind of holding on to their mortgages. They might want to move, but it's hard to give up a 3% mortgage for a 6.5% mortgage. Okay, so I'm going to do a stop share and let Jackson jump in.
Jump right on in, Jackson.
Great presentation, Pat. Thanks so much for kind of keying things in. I mean, it's been a crazy market, huh? And I will say, Pat and I try to pair our presentations together to give you all two different perspectives, right? And I think one of the ways when, I'm going to be showing you similar charts, right? But one of the ways that I really want to key into right now with the difference in these two charts is Pat kind of brought you through telling the story of how things have changed over the past couple of years, right? Those 12-month rolling averages, setting the context for right now. What I like to do in this sort of presentation is kind of give you what happened in the most recently completed month, in this case, the month of June, and how does that compare to prior Junes, right? There are two different ways of looking at the market, right? I'm not saying either are good or bad. You'll probably hear a lot of similar trends between what Pat says and what I say. But I hope that this shows you practically, there are many ways to slice and dice understanding the housing market. Use whatever method works best for you. And we can dive into the benefits and deficits of one perspective versus another. Without any further ado, let me jump into being able to share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
It's working.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to give you roughly what, Carson, a 12 to 15 minute presentation here. All right.
Yep, and then right just to around the top of 11, we'll do some questions and discussion and close it up. Thank you.
Sounds good. So let's kick things off. Like Carson said at the beginning of this webinar, my name's Jackson Pino. I'm Mars Public Affairs Manager, and this is going to be my Twin Cities market update for you, mostly covering the months of June. So let's start things off with probably the most pressing thing. Pat, you've already mentioned it here earlier on, but demand is not what it used to be, right? We like to use sales as that indicator for market demand, consumption by the consumer, right? In this instance, I'm using closed sales rather than pending sales, like Pat indicated. There are benefits to using both, but I know your preference for pending sales, Pat, so I decided to throw in closed sales here right in the beginning to just give us an understanding here that let me pull up my little marker here. Yeah, I got a great little laser pen here. That the closed sales in the month of June is, yes, at a low since 2012. It looks like we haven't had a market demand as low as about 5,300 units sold in about a decade. But you can see prior to 2020, when we had our beginning of our onset of the pandemic, there was a bit of a downwards trend. I would indicate that if there isn't the 3 years of a COVID pandemic, we would probably see some fluctuations. So this is really a rebounding effect from the fact that we had abnormally high market demand in June of 2021 in particular, but also the beginning of the onset of Federal Reserve interest rates to try to address outrun inflation that was going on. We hadn't seen the full impact of that yet. So the 6,500 in the June prior probably was still having the vestiges of inflation that it wasn't quite under control. This, as Pat and I will probably agree on, this is now what demand looks like when there is the full press of the brakes from the Federal Reserve, putting a full control of our inflation from the onset of this pandemic. right? On the flip side of that, because there is such less demand, you're seeing new listings, a great indicator for supply in the marketplace, down to 6,700 units, about 16% down from June of 2022. Yes, again, we're looking at a decades-long low here, right? But why is that the case? We know that today's seller is going to need to, when they sell a home, be a consumer as well, right? It's very unlikely in this current market that you are either just selling off a secondary home or you are selling a home to go into a rental situation or moving in with family or some other non-independent home owning alternative, right? So those two charts, both sales and new listings, impact one another in both sales impacting new listings and new listings impacting sales, right? That is a great reason why Pat and I love to look at the ratio of sales to listings. Now here we're using pending sales to new listings simply because pending sales is a leading indicator for closed sales of the preceding month. So if we're looking at pending sales in June, you can, for the most part, pending sales do end up closing, right? It's very rare. It's over 90% pending sales end up closing within that set time frame, right? June's ratio of pending sales to new listings shows exactly what we're talking about here in the context of the relationship of supply and demand. If you look at the peak of this supply and demand ratio in 2020, there was a very high percentage of pending sales that met the number of new listings. As in another way of looking at that, there was really hot demand. Every home that was going up onto the market practically was ending up in some sort of purchase agreement, right? Now that has dropped off since June of 2020. You can see about 10% drop from 2020 to 21, and then another 10% drop from 21 to 2022. But relative to pre-pandemic, that 70% pending sales to new listings ratio is similar. It's on par with what we were seeing in 2015 through 2019. A little under, yes, but that gives you better context of what we're saying in relative terms. Yes, the numbers that I showed you in the first two slides show that we are down decades-long low in absolute terms, in the actual number of sales. But relative to the demand that we're seeing right now, the listing is about, or listing to, let's make sure we have our terms correctly. Listings to pending sales, in other words, supply to demand, that ratio is about similar to what we're seeing pre-pandemic, 2016, 2017, 2018. I think that's fair, right? It shows us in context how we should be feeling. So if you say, yes, the market isn't what it isn't once what it used to be, yeah, of course it's not. It's not at that 92% pending sales to new listings ratio, but it is similar to what we were experiencing prior to that run on inflation, right? Let's take a look at some of those secondary metrics that Pat was looking at and kind of dive into them on a year over year perspective rather than in the previous X number of years, 12-month rolling average that we saw before. Cumulative days on market, the shelf life, if you will, of how long a home is going to stay on the market. You can see that there has been a pretty noticeable decrease, over the past 15 years or so, right? Most of that hit when we were in probably the the sweet spot, if you will, of 2013 through 2017. That was when we were closer to a balanced market. Ever since then, we were starting to become a more seller's market. And then all of a sudden, bam, COVID hit, right? You could see that there was some hesitancy at the first year of COVID, particularly in June. It was only a couple of months where we didn't know if the world was ending or not, right? So homes were still selling, but it was a question of, whoa, you know, do I have the money for this? Do I have the resources for this? Am I going to have to, sell all of my money and herd sheep for a living, right? Because the world was falling apart, agrarian society and all that, right? But when we realized the world wasn't ending, man, look at 2021 and 2022. It was taking a median, i.e., half the homes that were sold in those months sold in about a week. That is the difference of what we're feeling here. I think cumulative days on market is totally underestimated as a way in which we here in the real estate industry are able to feel the pace of how quickly things are going. Don't underestimate CDON. That's the one takeaway that I want you to have from this. Yes, we're back up to a median of 12 cumulative days on market for homes that were sold in this most recently completed month of June 2023. So we're rebounding, but man, it's still faster than it was in 2013 through 2016. And I think that's fair to say, right? Moving into sales prices, because I think there was a big concern about the idea of, man, is the Federal Reserve stomping on the brakes of the economy too hard? Are we implementing their interest rates too quickly, and all of a sudden we're going to see prices drop off in real estate? We did in the most recent months see marginal decreases in median sales price. 2 months. June would have been the third month if not for the fact that we had a relatively strong month. I do firmly believe that the increased activity that we see in the sweet spot of quarter two ended up having a mitigating effect, and median sales prices in June ended up being just marginally above. So let's just say a leveling effect, like Pat was talking about with that 12-month rolling average. We're seeing that here in June's median sales price as well. But what we aren't seeing is a decline below original listing price. We are still seeing increased offers above original listing price marginally. It's about 1.3% over asking price. And yes, that is down 2%, almost 3% from 2 years ago. But it is still over that asking price, or just below that we were seeing in the pre-pandemic market. So there is still demand out there, right? It's just relative to what we were seeing in the fever pitch of 2021, it is down. Inventory, we were just talking about inventory, and wouldn't you know it, similar story here, that inventory as an active count. So just an idea of what we're talking about here. We're taking a snapshot. Each of these bars is a snapshot of the last day in June. What was the active inventory? Anything that was listed under active status in the MLS on June 30th of that given year, right? Yes, we are down, and that is an indicator that the market is still in high demand, and is, like Pat was alluding to, is an indicator that our cities and our state overall have an incentive to grow. If we want to make sure that there are a wide variety of home buying options available, what we are seeing for the past 3 to 4 years is not it. We definitely want to be seeing the types of numbers that we were seeing in 2012 through 2016. Inventory is something that both myself, Pat, and the rest of our research team here at MAR would say is probably the key indicator of affordability. We need to increase inventory in order for home prices to not continue to go up, but also we want to make sure that they're going up in a stable way, predictable way, that indicates that people are able to prepare themselves for the cost of purchasing that home, right? So, month supply of inventory, all in context, right? How many months would this current inventory last if no one put their home on the market and we just had the same level of demand that we had? We are finally at 2 months supply of inventory. I say finally simply because we have been under 2 months supply of inventory for the better part of 2 years now since the onset of the pandemic. We are still in a strong seller's market. So if anybody is about to ring the warning bell, don't worry, we are in a strong seller's market. Prices are still going to go up. And we want to make sure that we have that economic growth, that dollar value growth here in the industry. That's still happening, but this is a bit of a reprieve for your consumers who might have been dealing with that 1 week to make a decision on a home that they did in 2021. There's a little bit more time now. There is comparatively a bit more advantage that the consumer has in this negotiation now, as we were seeing with the previous slides. So what does this mean for your consumer, right? If you have buying clients out there that have been looking at this and say, okay, well, comparatively, now's the time to buy. Whoa, not so fast. Because remember, I'll pull in that trend that we started this entire presentation off with. Interest rates are causing a financial barrier for many, most in particular in terms of monthly payments. Now, drawing your attention to the middle part of this grid, like right around here where this line is relatively flat, you can see prior to the pandemic, we were at a flat spot, about $1,600 a month to pay for your monthly payment for a median earning family to make a monthly payment on a median home. Okay, we're trying to stick to the meat of the economy here with median income, median household, right? And then COVID hit, and then there should have been, with that massive increase in demand, prices would go up, then monthly payments should go up. But we didn't see that. We saw a bit of an increase, but it was remaining relatively flat because historically low rates and rising incomes had partially offset those price gains a little bit, right? Now, can you guess where those low interest rates started to be replaced with higher interest rates? Right about at the beginning of January 2022. And that is the current feeling that your consumers are having right now. They went in a period of about 2.5 years from paying about $1,600 for a median income, median monthly cost on a median home, to $1,000, $1,100 a month more. That is their hesitancy to jump into the marketplace. It's not because the homes aren't great quality. It's not because it isn't what they want. It's because the picture of what they thought they could get is about $1,100 a month more expensive than it was prior to that. And some of you might be thinking, okay, whoa, if home prices are going up so quickly and monthly prices are going up so quickly, doesn't that mean that there's kind of a bubble here? No, not quite. It's simply because we don't have an excess amount of supply an artificially inflated amount of demand, right? If there was, 6 or 7 month supply of inventory and still this demand and still that sort of price, then yeah, I might be inclined to agree with you that there could be a bubble here. But this chart, the great mean reversion, shows us a great story of why we aren't seeing that type of bubble, right? You
Wait,
can
that's
see,
Pat's favorite.
Pat, you like the great mean reversion? So
I love it. It shows
good.
my whole lifetime.
So you can see a great visual of what a housing bubble looks like in terms of median sales price. You can literally see this blue dotted line, which is your average sales price, create a bubble over this red dotted line, which is a 5.8% year-over-year appreciation of homes. I'll save the math because we don't have time for it, but though that red and gray line is your upper and lower bounds of what homes probably should be appreciating at with controlling for inflation. And you can see that bubble occur right there. The market crashed in 2008, 2009, and we went below those bounds. And we've been creeping up to that lower bound ever since. And in 2020, that most recent recession indicator, look at us catch up to that lower bound. We're now within that range of what we should be expecting for homes. So if you really want to see it like the way economists see this, we were getting a deal on homes for the better part of a decade, and the run on inflation made us catch up quickly to being within these bounds. And then we started to say, whoa, that's a little bit too high of a year-over-year increase. And all of a sudden, homes have been locked into this price, but because of interest rates from the Federal Reserve, they're not getting out of control. Now, we've probably seen this all before at the beginning of the year. Annual forecasting shows that that both unit sales and home prices are either going to be down or flat throughout 2023, but they will rebound in 2024. So says Lawrence Yun at NAR. And then another thing, just make sure that we don't leave on a note of doom and gloom here. This is the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, inflation adjusted, to give you a sense of how Minneapolis is performing in terms of home prices relative to other metropolitan areas. We are here in pink. So we saw home prices increase over the past couple years along with everybody else, but you can see that the US average here in the middle, we didn't get as high as the average. We certainly did not get as high as San Francisco and other West Coast metropolitan areas. Same as with New York in red here. So we did see home prices increase, but we didn't see the major increases that were frankly unattainable in places like San Francisco. And because of that, we aren't seeing major drop-offs either. We are beating metropolitan areas like Chicago, also Milwaukee as well. So we are an economic strength in the region that isn't seeing the negative repercussions of run-on inflation like some of the coastal areas are. That is all I have, so I'm going to stop sharing. I know I went well over. I appreciate your lenience there, Carson. I know you could have shut me off at any point in time. But yeah, happy to chat for the next, what we said, 15 minutes past the hour, so another 8 minutes or so.
Thank you, Jackson. And I think Carson actually has dropped off because he had to leave.
Okay.
There are a couple of questions that are already on here that we'll start with. So one question from Riva is, what rents are most median income paying and higher income paying for luxury apartments. And unfortunately, I don't work the rental market much, so there's probably other people on here that know the answer better than me. But just a couple comments. Rents are going to vary widely because the available units vary widely in size, in age of building, in location. I will say that median income tenants are around 48,000, which equates to 4,000 a month, which means 30%, which is considered, affordable, means they can afford 1,200 a month. And it's tough to get rents at 1,200 a month, unless you're getting a 1-bedroom or something. Because I think when I do want to research rents, I look on places like Rent-A-Meter for a little bit of a, like a survey of a particular neighborhood, or you can look at Zillow rentals to see what some of the offerings are out there in other different locations. And and I know luxury or a lot of the newer constructed apartments are well over 2,000 a month. So Frank has a question on both Jackson and I referred to days on market and CDOM as secondary market data. Can you explain what's considered secondary? So this is entirely my opinion, Frank. And I know you've been following, my market presentations for a long time, and you know that I look closely at supply-demand ratios. I talked about low inventory today. And to me, that's a primary statistic that other statistics follow as being more secondary statistics. So primary is really that interaction between buyers and sellers. So right now we don't have enough sellers. We have a lot of buyers in relation to that. So the supply-demand ratio is low. And because it's low, that causes prices to go up. That causes the days on market to go down. That causes the sale to list price ratio to go up. So I think of those more as secondary market data, as opposed to we don't have a low supply demand ratio because the days on market is low. It's kind of the other way around.
And Pat,
go ahead, Jackson.
Yeah, I can also jump in here and just say, primary data is anything you can directly count. How many people bought homes? 1, 2, 3, 4. How many people listed homes on the market? 1, 2, 3, 4. How many homes remained on the market at the end of the month? 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? You can't count what the median how the median sales price is, or the median number of days on market, or anything else. You have to do some basic arithmetic or some level of analysis to understand what percent of original list price is. But anything that is primary data is just count it. And that's probably the most meaningful way it might make sense to you, in the same way that it makes sense to me there.
I'm going to add that Jackson, mentioned how important CDOM is at really looking at what we feel in the marketplace. And I agree with that totally. When we were down to 7 days on the market, and also all of us knowing that, still a lot of houses are sold contingent on inspection, so many of these sales are happening in a day or hours, and that just, that's what it feels like out there. And that's what we have to teach our clients to expect. So are there any other questions at this point? And people can feel free to speak up too if you want. There's not too many people on the call today.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Frank.
Wonderful. So the primary reason for the question out there is, CDOM is probably the number one thing for home sellers. You want to know how long is it going to take, right? And it's the number two thing is probably how much am I going to get? And yet we and it's not like you said, Jackson, it's not measurable. We can't count 1, 2, 3, 4, right? We can look at this stuff. We can determine median days on market or median cumulative days on market and median sales price. However, there's a gap, right? We analyze, we see the math, we do the math, and we come up with these numbers. But the consumer wants to know, how long is it going to take? And how much am I going to get? I think that's kind of the gap between the data and our craft, right, in the business. And so that's the reason I bring it up. And I think it's primary for home sellers. I understand that it's secondary in the statistical analysis, but it's really paramount for home sellers.
Yeah, and I will say, I don't want you to leave this feeling like primary and secondary have anything to do with importance.
No, I get that.
So and you and anybody else listening along, the words primary and secondary in this instance have nothing to do with importance, because I can tell you right now, median sales price is probably one of the most important things that we talk about. I mean, that's what gets the news all the time, and that's technically a secondary measure because you got to do math to it, right? So great point to bring that up, Frank. I really appreciate it.
And it's really good for us as agents that we have such a good wealth of data, particularly in the Twin Cities that was, originally created by MAR, the InfoSparks and so forth. And it gives us these kinds of metrics that are really easy to explain to sellers. Like you say, days on market, that's a really good metric to use that sellers can really relate to and understand, essentially. And you as an agent may be able to explain easier in a way that they can understand. So yeah, we've got a wealth of information. It becomes a lot harder to explain to sellers and buyers, what the meaning of supply demand ratio is, 2 months on the market. Whereas to me, that's kind of given me a picture of what I can expect from CDOM and what I can expect from, other data. So that's kind of how my mind works. But Frank, yeah, you're right. You're talking to a seller. They want to know how long is it going to take to sell. So any other questions? All right. Well, Jackson, I want to thank you. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. It's always an interesting discussion. And, we're going to line up for October, mid-October, to do this again.
All right. Thanks for having me, Pat.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.